subject, credit must be given to where credit is due. Last Wednesday night in our adult class here, we had a question that asked, what obligations do we have as citizens of the kingdom? And Mark answered that question with one word. That was his second one-word answer after answering all for one before. We kidded him a little bit about that. But then in answer to this question, what obligations do we have as citizens in the kingdom of Christ? He said, discipleship. It all, in one word, represents all that we're supposed to be and how we become what we're supposed to be. So that gave me an idea for a sermon since that. So giving credit to Mark for that one-word suggestion, let's talk about discipleship. If it is a one-word summary for what it means to be a Christian, what obligations we have as a Christian, if it is a one-word summary for what we need in order to go to heaven, then it certainly deserves a little bit of attention, especially, of course, when you realize we're talking about discipleship to Christ. And so, where do we find the best information? Well, obviously, we all would answer that question by saying, well, in the New Testament, of course. Our textbook for Christianity. And that's exactly right. But looking a little further and focusing a little more, we begin to realize that we would get the best information from the one who owns our discipleship. He has some things to say about discipleship. So if we want to learn some key important things that we need to know, that we can take with us and live every day, then let's listen to the one for whom we are disciples, the Lord. So when we do that, of course, what we're doing in this next few minutes is simply getting help from Him, getting help from the Lord, the one who owns our discipleship. But there is a text in which most Bible students regard as the standard text for discipleship during the earthly ministry of Christ, the one that becomes an iconic passage that you think about, I need to read something, be reminded about discipleship. We would turn to the passage that William read earlier. We're going to turn our attention to this. We appreciate that passage being read. It read not only the instructions that the Lord had about discipleship, but it gave us the setting, which we may be able to comment on along the way. But in this passage, in verses 24 through 27, we have some go-to principles that we always need to remember. We know and remember and apply them about discipleship. Because there's no way we can overemphasize the importance of your discipleship to Christ. It cannot be overemphasized. So as we take opportunity to look at some things about it, then let's take to heart what the Lord said. I would suggest to you that one of the things that He said is to explain us what it means. I can remember in youth being in Bible classes with good Bible teachers. We come to the idea or concept of being a disciple of Christ, and we were taught being a disciple means to be a follower. And that's exactly right. Another word that was often introduced and what it means to be a disciple of Christ is to be a learner of Christ. And that's also correct. And that's what we learned as kids, as young people. But as we grow to become better Bible students, we look a little deeper into the Word and we find a little more meaning. All that is still there. It hasn't changed, but it's a little deeper. And this is a passage where we find that. Let's take a look at what the Lord taught us about the meaning of discipleship. It's in verse 24. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, them that were then disciples, if any man would come after me. Let's just stop there. Put a period. The meaning of discipleship is right there. Now, it's not laying on the surface. You have to stop and think about it a little bit. What did he mean by that statement? Well, when we look below the surface and get into the meaning that the Lord has when he made that statement, if anyone desires to come after me. It's interesting to note that an alternative translation to that expression that's just as accurate. Jesus said, if anyone wishes to come behind me. Now that shows relationship. Discipleship is not out in front of him. It is after, behind him. And so when we look at the concept of discipleship, we want to be a good disciple. Obviously, we can't be out in front. Say, okay, I'm the leader here. Come along with me. I'll use you as I need you, like my insurance policy. Come along so you'll be handy and convenient. That's not discipleship. Discipleship to Christ is coming behind him. That's why he said at the very last part of this verse, follow me. Well, that's our posture with him. We are following behind him. Now that has a lot of implication. Let yourself think upon that for just a minute and all that that means, that we can understand what that means, even in our everyday relationship when we're following behind someone. We think of footsteps. We think of the pattern or example, concepts that are also in the Scripture. But let's add another word, another meaning to this passage. Because a part of the meaning that is inherent within the language that's also brought out by Hendrickson in this translation of this is the idea of adherence. And when we talk about Matthew 16, verse 24, that just simply goes along with the language that Jesus used. If any man wishes to be counted as an adherent of mine. Well, that means a lot. We are adherent to a number of things. We may not call it adherence. It may be involved in politics. It may be involved in education. But we're talking about discipleship to Christ. That involves an adherence. And we have a very clear understanding of what adherence means. It means we're fastened. It means we're connected. And exactly, discipleship to Christ then, according to just this simple expression in this one verse, is a steady attachment that follows him closely, attached, not at some distance. It's interesting how it seems like sometimes Christians have the concept, I'll follow you, Lord, but I'm going to keep my distance. I'm going to stay back a ways. I don't want to get too involved. I don't want too close to you. I don't want to feel your presence too much at part of my life. So we'll travel along behind you at a distance. I suggest to you that his language will not permit you to do that. You are an adherent. You are fastened. You are connected behind him, following his leadership, following his footsteps, following his example. So that's a bit of understanding of what it means to be a disciple. It has meaning. It's not just a religious expression, a sound good, feel good thought that we say once in a while. It is something that really has valuable meaning for everyday life. So I would urge each of us to evaluate our own discipleship as to whether ours has the meaning that he is teaching. And as we recognize from time to time from this passage, the Lord, and as we would expect, certainly has requirements for discipleship. Just anybody, everybody, for any, whatever feeling they've got, become disciples. No, the Lord has requirements that has to be met. But interestingly, they're also in the same verse, but in the last part. So let's go to that part for emphasis. Let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow him. So this person who desires to be a disciple, desires to follow after Jesus behind him, follow his leadership, let him first. In other words, he's got to fulfill certain requirements. Deny himself. And the more I have thought about that expression and have studied the original language and had a recent experience, maybe share with you, that it means, as I have expressed here, it doesn't mean just denying ourselves of some things or refusing to do certain things in our life. Christianity involves that, but that's not what this means. We are to deny but self. Don't miss the point. And that means once and for all, say farewell, goodbye, self. As what? Does that mean I can't have any good, healthy self-image? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that normally human beings, the way that we are, the way that we're born, the way that we are conditioned by our society, hey, nobody's more important than me. I control you, I control this, I control that. Everything has to relate to me and my food. That's a paraphrase of the way it might be. And so what the Lord is talking about is saying farewell to self in that capacity. In the capacity of having a dominance in life over your own desires and think-sos, over those of others, so that it is no longer, as we have said at the last part of this expression, no longer a dominating, controlling influence. Take up his cross. We have commented on that before. I don't think it hurts to be reminded that what the Lord is giving, this is a requirement for you, for me, for everyone who wants to be a disciple. He's got to not only deny self, but to take up his cross. You take up your cross. I take up my cross. Okay. Now what that means is the Lord took up his for you. And all he's saying here is you have to take up yours for me. Now ours, of course, is not a literal wood cross, but we do have a cross to bear. And it's just little simple inconveniences. That cross becomes a symbol for us of what it literally was for him, of suffering, of death, of sacrifice. And so when he says to you, you want to be my disciple, first say farewell to yourself as the dominating influence. Give your life to me. But in so doing, take up your cross. In other words, carry symbolically, as a Christian, as a child of God, that which is a symbol of your suffering for me. And so, requirements, discipleship to Christ requires, as according to him, these two things. Obliteration of self. That's Barclay's way of putting it, who is a respected language scholar, and a willingness to suffer for him. The initial insight I had to this word of obliteration came just a A short time ago, as you remember, when Bethany was home, her friend came to visit while she was here, and he left. But while he was here, we had some interesting discussions. Some religious, but some about his country, Japan. He was born and raised in Tokyo. And somehow in one of our discussions, Hiroshima came up. And I thought, that might be a little touchy. Why did you bomb us? Why was the atomic bomb dropped on us? Well, because you attacked Pearl Harbor, by the way. But that's all in the past. On December 7, 1942, you, Japan, attacked us. To end the war, we dropped a bomb. Have you seen the pictures of Hiroshima after that bomb exploded on the surface of that city? Obliteration. That's why when even in the news today we hear mention of World War III and how never would we want anything like that, because it will be a war far greater than that. Weapons will be far worse than one single bomb. But that as it may, obliteration. And so we talked about Hiroshima. He had pictures of Hiroshima today. It has recovered. They have symbols. They have monuments. They remember, just like we do when you visit Pearl Harbor and the monument that's there. Each of our countries has this in the past that should stay in the past. But it reminds us of a meaning of a word that comes close to describing what Jesus meant here. Obliteration. Wiping out self. I'll give you half of self. No, that's not good enough. Would you settle for 3/4 of half? 3/4 of a whole? No, not good enough. I want your whole heart. I want every bit of it. And in order to have that, I need you to deny yourself. And that means to remove it and say no. So those are the Lord's requirements for discipleship. Then he also expects us to accept a paradox. Now, a paradox we accept maybe from time to time. I don't know how often you may have to accept one. A paradox is something that's not common sense. Even young people have a feeling about something that doesn't make sense. Or in some cases, it's just exactly the opposite. So it can't work. It won't work. It's against all conventional human wisdom. Well, that's right. But in order to be a disciple, the Lord expects us to accept one of those. And I trust if you're a disciple of Christ, you have accepted his paradox. For whosoever would save his life shall lose it. And whoever shall lose his life for my sake shall find it. That's the statement that he made. When you stop and think, that goes against all normal thinking. In fact, it's contradictory. The way I'm to save my life is to lose it. It seems like when I'm losing it, not saving it. So all of that, we go into that and we can all think through that. But when you read good thoughts on this statement, some writers have called this the grand paradox of discipleship. And it truly can be thought of that way. We must be willing to accept a principle that involves what is against our normal common sense thinking and what is seemingly contradictory. It can't work. But to preserve our life, Jesus said, in parentheses, he meant he said, find it and to preserve it. One must surrender or lose it to him out of faith and love. Now, this is not talking about an abstract, accidental, careless throwing away of life. That's not what he's talking about. Discipleship involves each of us realizing that in order for this to work, in order for us to be what he wants us to be, in order for us to live up to his standard of discipleship, I've got to be willing to accept this paradox and live by it. And that means I want to preserve my life. I want to preserve my soul, and I'm speaking for you too, because I know you do as well. So what is that? What's he telling me? You've got to give it away. You've got to surrender it. You've got to lose it. And of course, what he means is discipleship is the only way. There is no other. The only way to avoid self-destruction and achieve preservation is discipleship to Christ. Now that seems like a rather extreme statement, but when you think about it, you have to accept the fact that's true. A person who comes into this physical world and lives life and never becomes a disciple of Christ is throwing themselves away. They can live for 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, and never accept discipleship. They're throwing their life away. That's a fact. They may have accomplished a lot of good things, may have had a lot of happy times on the face of the earth. But the reason for existence, the purpose they're here, why God created them, and the end result and all future consequences, they've thrown it away. On the other hand, thinking of that in a positive way, we want to have the best for us, for our families, for our loved ones, for our kids, our grandkids, all of our family, our neighbors. The only way that they can avoid self-destruction is discipleship to Christ. The preservation of life. And that will become more true. That is a paradox that must be accepted. The paradoxical part is a grand paradox of discipleship. Is there a personal benefit? We wouldn't be talking about it, would we, if there wasn't a personal benefit? Why am I doing this? Well, the Lord addresses the fact it's going to benefit you. It's going to help you. Aside from what we've already been implying and implicating in these previous statements, there's going to be personal benefit that starts now and goes on and on into eternity. For what shall a man be profited, benefited, if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? I know that verse can be read quickly. It can be read incidentally or only on the surface. Not that we're going into the deepest depths of it, but let's look at what the Lord is saying. Not accepting discipleship, not becoming a disciple of Christ means a loss that cannot be compensated for even the whole world. Even with the whole world. But let me try to emphasize that. If a person is dying and they're right at the point of death and they realize they're going down, their soul is lost and they're going to spend eternity in hell. Let me do something here. I own a lot. I have a lot. Let me do that in exchange. Lord said, won't work. Not not enough. But what if this individual owned this planet and everything on planet Earth? He had a deed. Let me give that to you, Lord, for my soul. Not enough. In other words, there's no compensation, nothing that can compensate for the value of your soul and its loss. So not accepting discipleship is a very serious matter. It means a loss of more than we can mention that can never be compensated for, even if we tried to give the whole world. If ye shall gain the whole world, it would not be enough to compensate. Well, discipleship provides a profit, a benefit, more valuable than the whole world. And that's the value that the Lord places upon your soul. That's the value the Lord places upon a soul, and in this case, yours. Discipleship provides a benefit to that point. And we need to wake up to that point and need to realize that point. And what is that? It's the saving of your soul. Don't take that for granted. Don't, that's language that we use. We hear it so often. Yes, but stop and think about it and let the sobering cold chills affect you when you think about that in terms of you and what it really means. Saving your soul rather than losing it. Discipleship to Christ provides that benefit. How could we stay a greater benefit? We could talk, if we wanted to give a lecture on the economy, on financial gains, on property ownership, and all those things that add value to our life. Those are blessings that God gives us. But there is nothing more valuable than the saving of your soul. Even the combination of value and the addition together so that we have the sum value of everything, it still does not equal the value of your soul. Put another way, the personal benefit of discipleship is to avoid losing. That's the benefit of discipleship. So think about it in a positive way, think about it in a negative way. Both of them together have an impact. And I want to go from this to take an opportunity to remind us exactly what are we talking about when we talk about our soul. We talk about our soul, even sometimes in Bible terms, and from Bible passages, we're not really aware of what it's talking about. We don't know exactly what it means when it's talking about your soul. Well, let's look at some passages where we know, if we know what those passages teach, we know what our soul is by faith. Faith cometh of hearing, and hearing the Word of God. Let's hear the Word of God on the matter of our soul. It is immortal. That part that's inside of you that is your soul will never die. It will never die. Matthew 10:28, Jesus said, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." Let me put that passage in a context perspective. The Lord is teaching us, if we are disciples, invariably we're going to encounter some unpleasant situations. There are going to be some people who don't like us, some people who are totally against what we live for, people who oppose the church. There's going to be all kinds of things that happen. And someone may even come and hold a gun to our head or a knife to our heart and say, "Deny Christ or you die." Now that would scare me to death. And you too. A lot have faced that. Some even in this country and more in other countries. Deny Christ or die. And sometimes people are so afraid of that man with the gun. Okay, I deny Christ. You see what the Lord is getting at? There's someone else that you should fear more than that man with a gun. You should fear more the God of heaven. Now that takes faith. It's not easy. But that's what the Lord is teaching you. Do not fear those who can kill you. If you want to fear, then if you got a choice, then have greater fear and let govern your behavior the fear of God, who can destroy both body and soul in hell. There will be a body and soul in hell, the resurrected body. But we want to be afraid. Let's not be as afraid of the one who has a gun as we are of God, who can destroy us totally forever. And so that soul is under discussion here. It is immortal. It is one part of you that possesses faculties. The Lord taught us this in Matthew chapter 22 and verse 37. He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." Well, we know that we're to love God with all of our heart and with all of our mind. And we can sometimes go that, okay, there's something else there. With all of our soul. So your soul is a part of you that has the faculty to love God. And the Lord is teaching us that we're to love Him with all of it. It is also that part of us that returns to God. It was given from God at our birth. It returns to God. We have wisdom on this subject from Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 7. When we come to the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, when he's talking about through chapter 12, he starts out that several things are said there that are important. But he talks about living and dying. In the verses just preceding verse 7, he talks symbolically, metaphorically, about aging, getting older. And finally, that process comes to the point where at some point all of us will die. Okay, what happens when that occurs? God teaches us in His wisdom, the dust that was used to create your human body will return. The spirit of you, which in Hebrew is the equivalent of the soul, will return to the one who gave that to you. It doesn't die. So dust will return to the ground. The soul, however, returns to God. But here's one statement that we continue to think about, study. And what we're saying on this point of identity of your soul, it's your own real self. Upon what basis of Scripture can we make that statement? Well, let's look at Luke's account of this same, of similar teaching. And when he comes to this principle, what is a man profited? That sounds similar to Matthew, of course, and it is. If he gained the whole world and lose or forfeit his own, you want to read soul, but he doesn't say soul. To lose or forfeit his own self. I wish I understood more about this. I wish the Bible would say more about this. But when we're talking about your soul, we're talking about your real self, who you are. Take the dust away. Take the physical body tabernacle away. What's left? You. Without the body. And that body, according to this statement of the Lord in Luke chapter 9, verse 25, is you. Your own real self. Now, when we go back to those other statements in Matthew of what we're preserving and what we're forfeiting, soul, yes, but it's yourself. So get serious about life. Get serious about what you're living for. But I want to have time for one more, and that's one final thing that the Lord has addressed about discipleship. There's going to be a record. We would expect that in view of the understanding of what the New Testament teaches in other places. The Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then shall he render unto every man according to his deeds. Well, that sounds like a general statement about about judgment, but he's talking about judgment of discipleship in this iconic passage. And so what he's talking about here is that those who are my disciples, those who accept, those who reject, will be brought to judgment. The one to whom our discipleship belongs promises that he will judge discipleship. As stated by Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10, we must all be made manifest before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may be compensated, recompensated, this New American Standard, for his deeds in his body according to what he has done, whether it be good or bad. So there's no escape from that. That is inescapable for each and every one. On this great day, and I included Jude 6 because that's the verse in your New Testament where Jude refers to this day, when this is going to happen, as the great day of judgment. It's a day of judgment, but he calls it a great day. We sing in our sometimes song, there's a great day coming. We sing that song, and this is what we're singing about. And so the judgment is something that we must always be prepared for, whether we're talking about discipleship or the same thing, except looking at it from the standpoint of being a faithful Christian, a faithful child of God. It comes back to our discipleship. So we're back to where we started, getting help from the one who owns our discipleship. And these are the things that he has addressed. Each one of them has clarity. Each one of them is simple enough for people of all ages, even our young ones, can understand these things and can learn about discipleship to Christ at the earliest possible learning ages. Its meaning, what he requires of us, deny self, take up our cross, the benefit it gives, there's no question. And finally, we realize in a very sobering, chilling manner, one day, we will give a reckoning of our discipleship. So how do I enter this discipleship? Let's answer it this way. Let's just use the words of the Lord. If a person is old enough and has not yet become a Christian, most likely, I'm not saying absolutely, but most likely, the problem is the difficulty that most people have of denying self, getting self out of the way. I can't do that. There's so much I want to do. I want this. I want that. I can't give my life to somebody else. That's generally where it needs to start. Deny self. Obliterate self as a dominating factor. Take up your cross. Yes, even in becoming a Christian. It's true every day. But in becoming a Christian, submit yourself to him, taking your cross, joining him because he suffered on his cross for you. And say, I'm willing. Okay, Lord, I'm here. I'm willing to carry my cross for you. Whatever life holds, whatever difficulties are in store for me as a Christian, I'm willing to bear my cross for you. And then go about obeying the gospel. The Lord answered the question in John chapter 3, Nicodemus. This passage has come up several times in recent sermons and class lessons, but Jesus said, before you can even see the kingdom, before you can even enter the kingdom, you've got to be born again, born anew. And he said, of water and the Spirit. And then we come to verse 7, which I have referenced, John 3:7. In concluding his comments to Nicodemus, he said, I have said, you must be born again. Now, when you realize what the Lord is saying, You've got to be born of water. You must be born of water. That's not something incidental that we can disregard and throw away like a lot of religious people have today. Jesus said, you must be born again of water. You must be born again of the Spirit, as guided by the Holy Spirit. So those are pretty clear instructions. We just have to be willing to submit. So there may be someone in this audience today who's subject to the invitation, or someone live streaming with us today who would like to study further. Let us know while together we stand and say.